Hey guys, tonight we're plunging into a chapter of history so profoundly disturbing, so deeply invasive, it feels more like a nightmare than a historical account. Imagine a time, not so long ago, when your very existence, your honor, your entire future, dangled precariously, a thread that could be severed by a horrifyingly crude examination, a so-called virginity test. You're navigating medieval Europe, a landscape of stone fortresses and mud-strewn thoroughfares, where torchlight flickers and whispered superstitions abound. Life is cheap, but a woman's honor is paramount, and its loss, or even the insinuation of its loss, could spell your doom. Honestly, you probably wouldn't last long in this era, given the incredibly high stakes and the unbelievably brutal methods. So, before you settle in, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I create here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. Now, dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's gently descend into tonight's journey together. You find yourself as a young woman in a bustling, compact medieval town. The air hangs heavy with the scent of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the distant, acrid tang of the privy. Life here is stark, brutal, and often fleeting. Your world is tightly bound by rigid social codes, religious doctrine, and the ever-present shadow of gossip. For women, your intrinsic worth, your standing in the community, your very ability to marry and form a family, is inextricably tied to your perceived purity. And this purity, in the eyes of the church and society, is frequently equated solely with your virginity. It's a concept so deeply embedded that it sculpts every facet of your life, from your attire to your interactions with men. But what transpires when that purity is called into question? What happens when an accusation, a faint suspicion, or even just a prenuptial custom demands irrefutable proof? This is precisely where the terrifying spectacle of the virginity test enters your world. You are not an individual with autonomy. You are merely a vessel, and your physical state is subject to relentless scrutiny. In certain regions, particularly among the aristocracy or in instances of suspected illicit relations, a bride might undergo such an examination prior to marriage to ensure she was intact and worthy of her prospective husband's lineage. Picture the overwhelming anxiety, the profound humiliation, as you stand before a group of elder women, perhaps a midwife or even a male physician, their expressions stern, their gazes dissecting you. A crucial historical aspect of this period reveals that the notion of female virginity was intrinsically linked to the belief in the hymen, a membrane presumed to seal the vagina. The prevailing wisdom held that a ruptured hymen offered undeniable evidence of sexual intercourse, and thus a loss of virginity. This simplistic and medically erroneous understanding became the very foundation upon which these brutal assessments rested. They were convinced that if this membrane remained intact, you were pure. If not, you were deemed fallen. The profound irony, of course, is that the hymen can be torn by myriad non-sexual activities. Vigorous physical exertion, riding horseback, or even simply vigorous childhood play. Or it could be naturally absent or highly elastic, rendering it an incredibly unreliable indicator at best. Yet, in this era, it was held as absolute proof. An intriguing, somewhat obscure detail involves the custom of displaying the tokens. This wasn't solely a physical examination. It also revolved around finding proof of virginity after the wedding night. If a new bride was not deemed a virgin by her husband, the blood-stained bedsheets from the wedding night were often paraded as undeniable tokens of her virginity. The absence of blood on these sheets could instantly cast doubt on her purity, leading to severe repercussions. Such a lack of visible proof might result in repudiation, public disgrace, or even accusations of witchcraft or adultery, effectively obliterating a woman's life. The immense pressure on the young bride to produce this evidence, often feigning pain or even resorting to self-inflicted injury to draw blood, was both overwhelming and utterly horrifying. You are not just being examined. You are expected to bleed on demand, to provide a tangible, incontrovertible sign of something far more intricate than medieval minds could ever comprehend. The terror of that first night, not for love or intimacy, but for the performance of a bloody proof, weighs heavily upon your spirit. The apprehension intensifies as you're escorted towards the examination. It's more than a mere physical invasion. It's a miniature public spectacle, even if only a handful of key individuals are present. You acutely feel every gaze upon you, every hushed murmur, every judgmental stare. In medieval Europe, the notion of personal privacy as we understand it simply didn't exist, especially for women whose bodies were often viewed as communal property, subject to the intense scrutiny and control of men, family, and the church. Your body, in this precise moment, isn't truly yours. It belongs to society's relentless expectations. Who exactly carries out these terrifying assessments? It varies, but frequently it's the midwife, a woman possessing practical, albeit sometimes superstitious, knowledge of the female anatomy. Her hands, though perhaps gentle in delivering a baby, are now probing and intrusive. Occasionally, particularly in more intricate legal disputes or for high-born women, a male physician might be involved. Imagine the added layers of humiliation and dread as a man, often unversed in the subtle nuances of a woman's body, performs this profoundly intimate examination. Their medical understanding, while perhaps superior to that of the common folk, remains rudimentary by modern benchmarks, leading to conclusions founded on flawed assumptions rather than genuine physiological insight. You are utterly at their mercy, and their verdict, however misguided, will seal your fate. In particularly grim scenarios, should an accusation of promiscuity or sorcery be leveled against a woman, even the executioner might play a role, not in the examination itself, but in the gruesome punishment that inevitably followed a failed test. You hear hushed whispers of women being stripped naked, publicly scourged, or even stoned for unchastity, a chilling reminder that the repercussions of these examinations often transcended mere social standing, becoming a matter of life or death. The very air around you feels thick with the weight of these unspoken menaces. It's a well-documented historical fact that the role of the midwife in medieval society was both complex and absolutely vital. She frequently served as the primary healthcare provider for women, assisting with childbirth, dispensing herbal remedies, and even acting as a moral compass within the community. However, this same intimate knowledge imbued her with the de facto authority on matters of female purity. If a midwife declared you intact, her word carried significant gravitas. Conversely, if she pronounced otherwise, her declaration could be tantamount to a death sentence. Her position granted her immense power over the lives and reputations of women in her community, a power that was seldom challenged. Intriguingly, an obscure practice involved the use of virginity oils, or potions, concoctions supposedly formulated to restore virginity or to create its appearance. These mixtures often comprised astringent herbs, pulverized stones, or even animal extracts, all believed to constrict the vaginal opening or induce a temporary tightening that would mimic the look of an intact hymen. You might catch hushed rumors among the women about these desperate remedies, passed down through whispers, offering a fleeting, false glimmer of hope. Some women, driven by sheer terror, would try anything, secretly applying these caustic mixtures, risking irritation, infection, and further injury in a desperate bid to pass the scrutiny. The bitter irony, of course, is that these desperate measures were far more likely to cause harm than to genuinely deceive. Yet belief in their efficacy persisted, a stark testament to the sheer desperation faced by women under such immense pressure. The stinging sensation you might feel, or the burning from some concoction, is a minor discomfort, or so you're told, for the sake of survival. The examination proceeds, and your heart pounds a frantic rhythm against your ribs. You are acutely aware of the instruments, or rather, the stark absence of sophisticated ones that your examiners wield. Discard any notions of sterile environments and precise medical apparatus. This is medieval Europe. The tools employed to ascertain virginity are frequently crude, utterly unhygienic, and frighteningly unsophisticated, born more from folk wisdom and ingrained superstition than from genuine anatomical insight. You might find yourself subjected to the finger test, arguably the most pervasive and intrusive method. The examiner, likely the midwife, uses her fingers to explore your vaginal opening, meticulously feeling for any perceived tightness or resistance, or for what they believe is the hymen. Her touch is firm, clinical, and entirely devoid of any comforting reassurance. You flinch, not solely from the physical discomfort, but from the profound sense of violation. Their quest is for a barrier, a membrane that they are convinced should remain perfectly intact. The absence of this perceived barrier, or even the sensation of it being loose, is sufficient grounds to condemn you. Beyond this manual exploration, some peculiar and frankly bizarre methods were occasionally put into practice. You might catch hushed rumors of a speculum, not the meticulously engineered, sterile device of modern gynecology, but a rudimentary implement, perhaps carved from wood or fashioned from rough metal, used to open the vaginal canal for a clearer internal view. The mere thought of such a crude instrument being forced inside you sends shivers down your spine. The inherent risks of injury, infection, and lasting trauma from such a device are immense, yet its use is deemed acceptable in the relentless pursuit of truth. An odd, seldom discussed practice involved the water test. This method leaned less on direct physical examination and more on a superstitious belief tied to the body's reaction to liquid. It was widely held that a true virgin would, under specific conditions, react distinctly to water, or that water, if introduced, would behave in a peculiar manner. For instance, some folk beliefs suggested that a virgin's urine would exhibit a different appearance, or that a special virginity water poured over the abdomen would unveil some secret. While not as universally applied as the finger test, these strange rituals underscore the desperate extremes people resorted to in their quest for proof. You might even be compelled to ingest strange concoctions, believed to induce a physical reaction if you were impure. The taste is vile, and the overwhelming fear of its potential effects on you is paralyzing. A fundamental historical fact to grasp is that medieval understanding of the human body was largely predicated on Galenic medicine, a system that emphasized the balance of humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. While this framework offered a means of interpreting illness, it provided remarkably little accurate insight into female anatomy or reproductive health. The notion of the hymen as a definitive seal of virginity was a gross oversimplification, a cultural construct rather than a scientific reality. This profound lack of precise medical knowledge rendered these tests not only invasive, but fundamentally unreliable. The examiners genuinely believed in their methods, however flawed, and their unwavering conviction only amplified your terror. The ordeal grinds on, and you can practically feel the immense weight of centuries of misinformation pressing down upon your very being. At the core of these barbaric examinations, the very object of their intense scrutiny, lies the hymen. In medieval Europe, this delicate membrane was far more than just a piece of tissue. It was seen as the physical embodiment of a woman's purity, a literal lock that only true sexual intercourse could ostensibly break. The chilling simplicity of this belief is terrifying in its profound implications, for it utterly disregards the intricate reality of the female body and the myriad ways this fragile membrane can be affected. You overhear the examiner murmuring about a perfect seal, or perhaps a broken gate. Their comprehension is fundamentally rooted in a colossal misconception, that the hymen is a taut, unyielding barrier that completely occludes the vaginal opening until first intercourse. They are absolutely convinced that a true virgin will possess this intact membrane, and its rupture is considered indisputable proof of sexual activity. This medical fallacy is staggering in its inaccuracy, yet it formed the very bedrock of your potential condemnation. Instinctively, you know that your own body is far more complex than their rudimentary theories suggest, but their profound ignorance poses your immediate and gravest danger. A firmly established historical fact illustrates that the hymen, in reality, exhibits a wide range of shapes and sizes. It is often a crescent-shaped or fimbriated, fringed piece of tissue, not a complete seal, and it can be naturally absent, incredibly elastic, or torn through non-sexual activities such as strenuous exercise, horseback riding, or even the accidental insertion of fingers during childhood play. This vast biological variability, completely unknown to medieval practitioners, meant that countless innocent women would have failed a virginity test, not due to any sexual activity, but simply because of their natural anatomy or common, everyday occurrences. You realize, with a cold, sickening dread, that your body's unique and natural variations could be misinterpreted as an irrefutable mark of shame. An unusual, almost folkloric detail connected to this pervasive misconception is the ardent belief in virgin's blood. It wasn't solely the intact hymen they sought. It was the ingrained expectation of blood upon first intercourse, often referred to as tokens of virginity, as we discussed earlier. The absence of this expected blood, even if the hymen was deemed present, could instantly cast deep suspicion. This led to desperate measures among women who had somehow passed the initial physical inspection, perhaps owing to natural hymenal variation or elasticity, but knew they might not bleed on their wedding night. You hear hushed accounts of brides subtly pricking themselves with needles hidden in their hands or beneath their fingernails, or even furtively using small vials of animal blood, perhaps from a chicken or a rabbit, obtained through clandestine means, to stain the sheets. The performance of pain and feigned shyness on the wedding night, simulating the anticipated agony of defloration, became a grim, life-or-death theatrical performance, enacted within the shadowed confines of the marital bed. The acting had to be utterly convincing. Your very survival depended upon it. The phantom prick of a needle seems to graze your skin as you contemplate such a desperate, agonizing act. This fundamentally flawed understanding of the hymen relentlessly perpetuated a cycle of profound fear, crushing shame, and grave injustice. It brutally reduced women to their mere physical state, denying them any semblance of agency and rendering their inner lives, their true character. Entirely irrelevant in the face of this brutal, baseless anatomical proof. Your very life literally hangs in the balance, dependent upon a complete misunderstanding of your own body, a misunderstanding that has been tragically codified into societal law. As you endure this deeply demeaning process, a chilling realization dawns upon you. The immense pressure isn't solely emanating from the examiner. It radiates outwards, an invisible force woven into the very fabric of the community itself. In medieval Europe, your reputation was everything, a lifeline not just for yourself, but inextricably intertwined with your family's honor. A scandal involving a fallen woman could cast a long, oppressive shadow over your entire lineage, potentially blighting your sister's marriage prospects, undermining your brother's standing, and even jeopardizing your parents' social acceptance. The judgment is a palpable, suffocating force, pressing in on you from every conceivable direction. You can almost feel the collective gaze of countless eyes, even those not physically present. Every neighbor, every gossiping market woman, every devout churchgoer transforms into a silent, scrutinizing judge. The tight-knit, insular communities of the era meant that secrets were virtually impossible to contain, and rumors, once unleashed, spread like an unstoppable wildfire, often fueled by envy, malice, or simple misunderstanding. A mere whisper of impropriety could instantly trigger the terrifying cascade of events that culminates in the demand for a virginity test. The stakes are breathtakingly high, not just for your physical body, but for your entire social existence, your very place within the world. Historically, it's undeniable that honor and shame cultures held absolute sway in medieval Europe. A woman's sexual purity was considered paramount to the honor of her entire family. To lose one's virginity outside the sanctity of marriage was not merely a sin. It constituted a profound dishonor that could lead to immediate social ostracism, disinheritance, and even outright violence. This pervasive societal obsession with female virginity stemmed from a potent confluence of religious doctrines, emphasizing chastity, deeply ingrained patriarchal control over women's bodies and property, and the critical need for clear, undisputed lineage in an age predating widespread genetic testing. The community's unwavering belief in your purity was not a personal, private matter. It was a powerful public declaration of your family's standing and worth. One particularly unsettling and unusual detail that powerfully illustrates the community's intense scrutiny is the phenomenon of charivari. While frequently associated with mocking mismatched couples or scandalous second marriages, a particularly harsh form of charivari could also be directed squarely at women perceived to be unchaste. Imagine a raucous, mocking procession, perhaps involving the banging of pots and pans, loud, jeering shouts and crude effigies, marching defiantly past your very home. This brutal public shaming ritual, often orchestrated by the young men of the village, served as a potent form of social control, ruthlessly reinforcing norms and punishing perceived deviations. You can almost hear the cacophony, the humiliating chants echoing in your ears, and the desperate scramble of your family members to hide from the public spectacle. A chilling, tangible reminder of the fate that undeniably awaits you if you fail this agonizing test. The community, you realize, doesn't merely judge. It actively and enthusiastically participates in your profound humiliation. The overwhelming power of collective belief and pervasive fear is immense. It tragically transforms a crude medical fallacy into an undeniable social imperative, forcing you, a young woman, to literally put your body on trial for the sake of your family's honor and your own survival. The air around you feels thick, laden with the silent expectations and unspoken judgments of generations past and present. The examiner concludes their inspection, and you find yourself holding your breath, your entire being coiled in anticipation of the verdict. This is the pivotal moment, a terrifying pronouncement that will irrevocably determine the entire course of your life. The repercussions of failing a virginity test in medieval Europe transcended mere social embarrassment. They were often brutally severe, leading to fates far more dreadful than a simply tarnished reputation. Should you be declared not a virgin, the immediate ripple effect is catastrophic. Your marriage, if one was planned, is almost certainly annulled or abruptly called off, bringing immense and indelible shame upon your family. You could face disownment by your parents, cast out from your home and community with nothing but the clothes on your back. For a woman in medieval society, stripped of familial support or a husband, independent survival was virtually impossible. You face a grim future of destitution, starvation, or being forced into desperate means of survival, often leading to begging or prostitution, which only deepens your societal shame. Beyond social ruin, legal and physical punishments were chillingly commonplace. You could be accused of fornication, a grave sin and a serious crime in many medieval legal codes. The penalties varied significantly by region and specific statutes, but they were rarely lenient. You might endure public penance, forced confessions, or even public flogging. Imagine the searing sting of the whip, the cruel jeers of the crowd, every lash a stark mark of your impurity. In some localities, particularly under stringent religious laws, the penalty could escalate to even more extreme measures, including mutilation, banishment, or even death, especially if the accusation was compounded by charges of adultery or witchcraft. You catch hushed whispers of women being drowned or burned, fates so horrific they seem like dark fairy tales, but for you, they represent a stark and immediate possibility. A significant historical reality underscores that in many medieval legal systems, particularly those heavily influenced by canon law, the sexual purity of women was directly tied to property rights and inheritance. A woman found not to be a virgin before marriage, or discovered to have committed adultery, could irrevocably lose her dowry, her inheritance rights, and any legitimate claim to her husband's property, leaving her utterly destitute. This profound economic vulnerability meant that the virginity test wasn't solely about moral judgment. It served as a powerful instrument for controlling female wealth and lineage. Your entire financial future, or its devastating absence, hinges entirely on this outcome. A disturbing, albeit less common, detail that grimly illustrates the extremity of these consequences is the infamous scold's bridle. While not exclusively reserved for those who failed virginity tests, this torturous device, an iron muzzle featuring a spiked plate that pressed down on the tongue, was used to brutally silence women deemed disobedient, gossipy, or unchaste. If you were accused of being a loose woman, or if your failure led to public defiance or verbal protest, you might find yourself subjected to this horrific muzzle paraded through the town square, a living, breathing example of female suppression and the brutal enforcement of moral norms. The bitter, metallic taste of fear fills your mouth as you conjure a vivid image of such a dreadful device. The verdict is finally delivered, and the world seems to abruptly tilt on its axis. Whether you are condemned or miraculously cleared, the profound and enduring trauma of this harrowing experience will forever be indelibly etched into your soul. The immense weight of the verdict hovers in the air, a sharpened blade poised directly over your head, If you've been declared impure, the terror assumes an entirely new, desperate dimension. For countless women in your dire predicament, facing utter ruin, the instinct for raw survival ignites an incredible, often perilous ingenuity. You either witness firsthand, or perhaps even become a participant in, the extreme lengths to which women would resort to either successfully pass these tests or meticulously feign their virginity, even when they knew deep down it was a complete fabrication. This brutal era, in its very savagery, paradoxically fosters a grim, cunning female resilience. You catch whispered accounts of women who, understanding their fate was irrevocably sealed if they spoke the truth, would meticulously attempt to simulate an intact hymen. This desperate gambit might involve discreetly inserting small, soft objects or tightly rolled wads of cloth into the vagina just before the examination, fervently hoping to create a temporary obstruction that would successfully deceive the probing fingers of the midwife. The inherent risks of infection or further injury from such crude, unhygienic methods are staggering, but the chilling alternative, public humiliation, disownment, or far worse, is infinitely more terrifying. You can almost feel the phantom pain, the overwhelming fear, and the sheer, audacious bravery required for such a desperate act of calculated deception. Beyond these physical deceptions, there were elaborate ruses involving the vital tokens of virginity for the impending wedding night. If a bride was not a virgin, yet had somehow managed to pass the initial physical inspection, perhaps due to natural hymenal variation or elasticity, the immense pressure to produce blood on the wedding sheets remained absolutely paramount. You hear harrowing stories of brides subtly pricking themselves with needles cunningly hidden in their hands or beneath their fingernails, or even furtively using small vials of animal blood, perhaps from a chicken or a rabbit acquired through clandestine means, to deliberately stain the sheets. The meticulously staged performance of pain and feigned shyness on the wedding night, simulating the anticipated agony of defloration, transformed into a grim, life-and-death theatrical production, enacted within the shadowed confines of the marital bed. The acting simply had to be utterly convincing. Your very life hung precariously upon it. The ghostly prick of a needle seems to graze your skin as you contemplate such a desperate, agonizing charade. It's a widely acknowledged historical reality that desperate women, particularly those from lower social strata or those trapped in unforgiving forced marriages, frequently sought out older, discreet women within the community who possessed an invaluable knowledge of such tricks. These women, sometimes respectfully called wise women, or even quietly witches by their detractors, might offer hushed advice on specific herbs, secret concoctions, or clandestine methods to convincingly simulate virginity. This clandestine, underground network of shared knowledge serves as a powerful testament to the overwhelming, oppressive societal pressures and the remarkable resilience of women desperately seeking to survive within its unforgiving confines. An unsettling, truly obscure detail involves the grim use of leeches for restoration. In some dark, twisted corners of medieval belief, it was gravely thought that applying leeches directly to the vaginal area could somehow tighten or reseal the hymen, or at the very least, induce enough swelling and mild bleeding to convincingly mimic an intact state. The sheer discomfort, excruciating pain, and obvious, undeniable health risks associated with such a horrifying practice, including severe infection and potentially life-threatening blood loss, starkly highlight the extreme, unbearable desperation these women faced. You recoil in disgust at the mere thought, the cold, slimy sensation of a leech, all in the utterly vain hope of appearing pure. These aren't merely crude methods. They are profound acts of self-violation, tragically born from a society that offered no other viable path to safety or survival. The oppressive shadow of the virginity test extends far beyond the immediate physical examination, reaching deep into the intricate, often treacherous, legal labyrinths of medieval Europe. Your fate isn't solely determined by the subjective judgment of a midwife or the relentless gossip of neighbors. It can be tragically enshrined or irrevocably condemned by the very laws of the land. In this unforgiving era, virginity was not merely a moral virtue. It functioned as a crucial legal commodity, a pivotal piece of evidence in cases ranging from the solemn signing of marriage contracts to grave accusations of rape, and even to complex disputes over inheritance. You find yourself navigating a world where a woman's spoken word often held little, if any, weight unless it could be powerfully corroborated by undeniable proof, and that proof invariably centered on her physical state. If you faced an accusation of illicit sexual activity, your virginity, or its perceived absence, instantly became the central point of bitter contention in trials. The examination, no matter how profoundly flawed its methodology, could be presented as compelling evidence, ultimately determining whether you were deemed an innocent victim, a cunning liar, or a hardened criminal. Imagine standing rigidly before a stern, unyielding judge, perhaps a formidable church official or a Lord's representative, as your most intimate and private details are ruthlessly laid bare in the name of what they termed justice. A critical historical insight reveals that in numerous medieval legal systems, especially those heavily influenced by canon law, the sexual purity of women was explicitly tied to their property rights and the right to inheritance. A woman found not to be a virgin before marriage, or discovered to have committed adultery, could irrevocably lose her dowry, forfeit her inheritance rights, and be stripped of any legitimate claim to her husband's property, leaving her utterly and tragically destitute. This profound economic vulnerability meant that the virginity test wasn't just about moral judgment. It served as an incredibly powerful tool for maintaining strict control over female wealth and lineage. Your entire financial future, or its devastating non-existence, hinges precariously on this single outcome. An unusual, almost academic detail related to this legal landscape involves the concept of restitution of virginity, as discussed in certain legal texts. While physiologically impossible, some medieval legal and theological treatises delved into the perplexing idea of a woman's virginity being restored, either through divine intervention or by the very act of marriage itself, particularly if she had been sexually assaulted. This wasn't a physical restoration, but rather a legal and moral one, ingeniously designed to protect the honor of the family or to allow for a legally and religiously valid marriage in the eyes of the church. However, it implicitly acknowledged the immense social and legal burden placed upon non-virgins, creating a convoluted, almost mythical pathway to reclaim what was considered tragically lost. You might overhear learned men ardently debating such intricate theological nuances, completely oblivious to the physical reality of what they were discussing, all while your own life hangs agonizingly in the balance. The legal system, mirroring society at large, was constructed upon an unquestioned, absolute acceptance of the hymen as the definitive, irrefutable marker of purity. This meant that the legal battleground for women was frequently fought not with logical arguments or compelling witness testimonies, but with invasive examinations and deeply, dangerously flawed medical assumptions. Your body, once again, becomes the primary piece of crucial evidence, subjected to interpretations that could either clear your name or irrevocably destroy it within the unforgiving, rigid framework of medieval law. As centuries slowly turn, almost imperceptibly, a faint glimmer of illumination begins to pierce through the dense fog of ingrained superstition and unquestioned tradition. You observe the gradual, hesitant emergence of skepticism, a quiet, persistent questioning that meticulously chips away at the absolute authority of the virginity test. This isn't a sudden, revolutionary upheaval, but rather a slow, often perilous, intellectual rebellion against deeply entrenched beliefs, spearheaded by a handful of brave, pioneering individuals. You might catch hushed whispers among the more learned physicians, particularly as medical knowledge, however incrementally, began to advance beyond the rigid confines of Galenic humors. These rare, insightful individuals started to keenly observe that the hymen was not always the infallible indicator it had long been proclaimed to be. They began to notice the natural variations, the inherent elasticity, and the undeniable fact that some women simply did not bleed upon first intercourse, or that common accidents could effortlessly rupture the delicate membrane. Their groundbreaking observations were often initially dismissed, but they subtly planted crucial seeds of doubt within the medical community. A verifiable historical detail shows that by the late Renaissance and early modern period, some progressive medical texts started to cautiously acknowledge the significant variability of the hymen. Anatomists like Andreas Vesalius in the 16th century, through their meticulously detailed dissections, provided far more accurate descriptions of human anatomy, directly challenging older, less precise notions. While these discoveries did not immediately dismantle the deeply ingrained practice of virginity testing, they undeniably laid the crucial groundwork for future skepticism and more accurate understanding. You can almost picture these pioneering physicians poring over crude anatomical diagrams, slowly realizing that the simplistic, unchallenged understanding of centuries past was fundamentally flawed. An intriguing, somewhat niche aspect of this nascent skepticism is the appearance of legal arguments that earnestly attempted to account for these newly observed inconsistencies. Confronted with perplexing cases where the evidence of a virginity test seemed to directly contradict other compelling factors, some lawyers or even judges began to cautiously consider circumstantial evidence or a woman's moral character alongside the physical examination. This was a desperate yet significant attempt to reconcile a demonstrably flawed test with what they observed in real life. For instance, a woman of otherwise impeccable reputation might surprisingly be given the benefit of the doubt, even if her physical examination yielded ambiguous results. This wasn't necessarily an act of genuine compassion, but rather a logical, albeit tentative, attempt to maintain a semblance of justice when the physical proof repeatedly failed to be conclusive. You might hear learned legal scholars debating the abstract concept of a moral hymen versus the physical one, a convoluted yet telling way of acknowledging the test's inherent unreliability without entirely discarding it from legal practice. However, despite these nascent, flickering doubts, the formidable power of cultural inertia and pervasive patriarchal control meant that the deeply ingrained practice of virginity testing persisted for an exceptionally long time, especially in more conservative regions and deeply traditional communities. The crucial seeds of skepticism were certainly sown, but the bountiful harvest of true understanding and genuine justice was still many centuries away. You can almost feel the slow, arduous grind of societal wheels, moving far too slowly for the countless women still tragically trapped within the unyielding iron grip of this archaic practice. The faint echoes of doubt are barely audible, but they are undeniably present, hinting at a future where your body might, one day, truly be your own. The sun has long since set on medieval Europe, yet the dark, unsettling echoes of the virginity test, disturbingly, continue to reverberate even in your contemporary world. While the crude physical examinations conducted by midwives and the public rituals of shaming may largely be relegated to dusty history books, the deeply rooted cultural anxieties and the relentless pressure on women concerning their sexuality persist in surprisingly subtle, often insidious ways. You might comfortably believe this ancient horror has vanished entirely, but sadly, its spectral form undeniably lingers. You can observe how, in certain parts of the world, even today, the concept of virginity certificates, or invasive virginity tests, still regrettably exists, frequently in contexts related to marriage, immigration, or various legal cases. Though vehemently condemned by major medical and human rights organizations worldwide, these practices serve as a stark, chilling reminder of how profoundly ingrained the control over female bodies and sexuality can remain. These modern iterations might employ more scientific jargon and sophisticated language, but their underlying premise remains tragically identical. A woman's worth, or even her basic freedom, is inextricably linked to a fabricated ideal of purity. A critical, globally recognized historical fact that directly underscores this enduring issue is that the World Health Organization, WHO, and the United Nations, UN, unequivocally condemn virginity testing as a severe violation of fundamental human rights and a blatant form of gender-based discrimination. Both organizations emphatically state that there is absolutely no scientific basis for such tests, and they are inherently painful, deeply humiliating, and profoundly traumatizing. This international condemnation powerfully highlights that what was once a barbaric norm in medieval times is now universally recognized as a profound abuse. Yet its very continued existence in certain parts of the present day is a chilling, regrettable legacy. An intriguing, somewhat disquieting detail that starkly connects the past to the present is the persistent prevalence of re-virginization surgeries or hymenoplasty. This highly controversial surgical procedure, performed specifically to reconstruct the hymen, exists precisely because of the enduring societal pressure and deep-seated stigma attached to non-virginity in certain cultures and communities. Women, driven by the profound fear of family rejection, severe social ostracism, or even brutal violence, tragically undergo these surgeries in a desperate attempt to create the convincing illusion of virginity for their wedding night. This acts as a modern-day equivalent of the desperate tricks employed in the distant past, powerfully demonstrating that while the methods may have evolved, the underlying fear and the pervasive societal expectation of an intact hymen, whether genuinely real or meticulously feigned, have not entirely vanished from the human experience. You can almost feel the profound pressure many still endure, forcing them to modify their own bodies to conform to an ancient, utterly false ideal. As you reflect upon this dark, winding historical journey, you come to understand that the harrowing story of the virginity tests of medieval Europe is not merely about a bizarre, long-abandoned historical practice. It serves as a powerful, unsettling lesson about the grave dangers of ignorance, the pervasive, suffocating nature of patriarchal control, and the enduring, tireless struggle for women to ultimately claim fundamental autonomy over their own bodies and their own destinies. The past, in its own horrifying and visceral way, still whispers its timeless warnings into the very fabric of the present. Now, as the haunting echoes of these dark tales finally recede, allow your mind to gently drift away from the harsh realities of the past. Feel the comforting warmth of your blankets, the soft, rhythmic hum of the fan, or the quiet, enveloping stillness of your room. Consciously let go of the anxieties and the heavy historical burdens we've explored tonight. Breathe deeply, slowly, and simply allow yourself to sink into the profound comfort and safety of your own space. Imagine profound peace, tranquil quiet, and a sense of absolute safety washing over you, leaving absolutely no room for the lingering shadows of history. Your mind is clear, your body completely relaxed, and only the most peaceful dreams now truly await you. Sweet dreams.